Hello and welcome to the opening session of the MISC annual conference, in conversation with David Johnston and Charles Broffman. I would like to begin by introducing our moderator for today, Althea Raj. Althea Raj is a national political columnist with the Toronto Star and a member of the CBC's At Issue panel. Althea participe chaque semaine à l'émission L'Essentiel de CIPAC et à son balado Politics Today. Elle est fréquemment invitée aux émissions 24-60 de Radio-Canada et En direct avec Patrick Roy. Lors de la campagne électorale de 2021, elle a également écrit une chronique dans Le Devoir et participé au balado de Peter Mansbridge de la CBC pour son édition hebdomadaire Reporter's Notebook. Althea is a proud parliamentary internship program alumna, a graduate of McGill University. She has a joint honors degree in Canadian Studies and Political Science. She currently serves on the board of trustees of the McGill Institute for the Study of Canada. She's also a volunteer board member of the Ottawa Art Gallery and the co-founder of act613.ca. Althea, c'est à toi. Merci.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Althea Raj. As Daniel mentioned in his introduction, I'm a graduate of the Canadian Studies program at the McGill Institute for the Study of Canada, and I currently serve on its board of trustees. I am pleased to be moderating this discussion this morning about MISC's past, present, and future, and how it has grown and changed over the last 25 years, and how we might see that change reflected in the country as a whole. I'll start by introducing our two guests who will lend their invaluable perspectives to this conversation. The Right Honourable David Johnston was Canada's 28th Governor-General. During his mandate, he established the Rideau Hall Foundation, a registered charity that supports and amplifies the Office of the Governor-General and its work to connect, honour, and inspire Canadians. Today, he is actively involved as chair of the RHF Board of Directors, and in 2018, he was appointed Colonel to the Royal Canadian Regiment. Prior to his installation as Governor-General, Mr. Johnston was a professor of law for 45 years and served as president of the University of Waterloo for 2 terms and as principal of McGill University for 3 terms. He holds degrees from Harvard, Cambridge, and Queen's and has received more than 3 dozen honorary degrees or fellowships. He has authored and co-authored more than 30 books and was named Companion to the Order of Canada in 1997. Charles Broffman has spent much of his life as an active businessman. Following a 50-year career with the Seagram Company Limited, he retired in 2001 as its co-chairman. Mr. Broffman was chairman of the Andrea and Charles Broffman Philanthropies for 30 years until its sunset in 2016. Its core programs encouraged young people to strengthen their knowledge and appreciation of their history, heritage, and cultural identity. Mr. Broffman continues to sit on the boards of the McGill Institute for the Study of Canada, Historica Canada, and Birthright Israel. He is the Director Emeritus of the Board of Trustees, Mount Sinai Health System, and sits on the board of Israel Policy Forum. He is a member of the Queen's Privy Council for Canada and Companion of the Order of Canada, our country's highest civilian honor. Thanks so much to both of you for being here. Perhaps I will start at the beginning and ask you how MISC was created. What were the ideas that launched this program forward? If you could bring us back, I guess, to the early 1990s. And maybe, Mr. Broffman, I'll start with you. How did this idea come about?
Well, as I recall, David and Althea, there was a capital campaign that McGill was having, and I was visited by David Johnston, who was then the principal, as you suggested, and David Culver, who was the campaign chair. And they talked to me about a contribution to this campaign. I had been thinking about an institute for the study of Canada, and I proposed that to these gentlemen, and they said, let us think about it. And that was the beginning of a long and fruitful association.
Mr. Johnston, what did you think about Mr. Broffman's idea?
Well, Althea, the first thing I'd say to Charles is the thinking about was about a nanosecond, Charles, as I recall. It was a brilliant idea. You're right. It was the start of a major campaign for McGill, very important to us at that particular context, and we'll speak about that, Althea. But we sat down in Charles' office and he said, I want to do something for Canada. and I have this vision. And it was very visionary, and it was also very courageous. Visionary because it was his concern that Canada had the desire to see its greatest opportunities and to hold the country together with a great sense of inclusivity, to take pride in the country and to see the future as very bright. It was courageous because the context was a challenging one. We were between two referenda, the 1980 referenda on sovereignty for Quebec and the 1995 one, which came so much later. And McGill was in a challenging position as a largely English-speaking institution in a majority French province. So Charles's move was a very, very visionary and a very courageous one. And for McGill, and I think for Canada, was really important at the time. And I think the history of the Institute after that has just shown that in a very dramatic way.
Was there any pushback, or was everybody on board with this idea?
You have to answer that, David. I didn't have pushback because it was my foundation.
I remember, Charles, that it was really your idea, and you had some very powerful advisors from outside of Quebec. And as I recollect, what you had to deal with was, first of all, do we really need another academic institution studying Canada? Don't we have, chairs and departments and so on that teach Canadian history, et cetera? Why this institute? And then there was an issue of, well, if there's going to be an institute, would it be highly scholarly and very traditional in its academic pursuit? Or would it try to bring Canada alive, especially to young people, and in a sense popularize what Canada means? And then the third issue was, well, if you're going to create an institute for the study of Canada, why would you create it in Quebec, where the fires of sovereignty and separation are very real, at least at this time? And then if you're going to create it in Quebec, why would you create it at an English-speaking institution when it's a majority province? Or at McGill, which is a very traditional institution. Those are all issues, Charles, that I think you had to overcome with your advisors. And we certainly had some passionate explanations and we hope persuasive factors, but it was you that made the decision that there will be an institute. It will be for the study of Canada. It will be broadly based, and it will be at McGill. And that's how it began. And as I say, in the context, it was very courageous.
Well, David, as I recall it, and as you, I'm sure, recall it, when we together got this institute, we got its ground rules, its constitution, if you want. There were three areas. One was the teaching area, teaching of various aspects of Canada, be it geography, be it economics, be it our, as you say, rather short history compared to the UK, for instance. Then there was research. And lastly, and very importantly, there was outreach. We decided that we would hold a conference yearly. And at that conference, there would be subjects of the day. In fact, the first one we ever held was at the law faculty, if you recall this, and it was on the subject of separation. So we got off of the bank, and all the news media was outside the law faculty, and it was quite a go around. But one of the reasons for the idea of interdisciplinary and particularly the outreach was to let Canadians know in a little bit more of a practical way what their country was really all about. What were the issues facing Canada? How did we relate to other countries? How do we relate to the United States? What about our transport problems? In other words, to go beyond the immediate French English situation, Quebec, rest of Canada situation, and get into the nitty gritty of what makes a country. I had always thought that any society has to have its heroines, heroes, myths, and even bad guys. And without that, the society will fail. And in Canada, if you ask many Canadians during the 1980s, who are you? The answer might well be, well, I'm not American, and I'm not French, and I'm not English. And the interlocutor would say, well, that's very nice, but who are you? And the Canadian said, well, I just told you. So we had no foundation, as it were, as a culture. We didn't have, except with the exception of Louis Riel in French Canada and Laura Secord and her cow in English Canada, we didn't have the heroines, heroes, and even the myths. And by gosh, it was time we had that.
What a wonderful explanation, Charles, of how that vision unfolded. And Latheo, let me just indicate one little story that underlies that. Charles was the creator through his foundation of the Heritage Minutes that we see about Canada on television, which I think are just spectacular. We've had them for some time. As I recall the story, Charles, that came about because you were being installed, I think you were already an officer of the Order of Canada, you were being installed as a companion, the highest citizen order we have in Canada, companion of the Order of Canada. And you said, as you listened to the citations of the 70 or 80 people who were being installed with you, companions, officers, members, how remarkable these people are, and what a diverse set of experiences and leadership we see across this marvelous country of ours. But you know, we don't know anything about it. People don't know about who these current heroes are and who our past heroes are, and how it's made this country the special place that it is. Somebody should do something about it. Then I think you said to yourself, well, Charles, I'm a man of something. And you did something about it. I watched Heritage Minute just yesterday on television. It was the discovery of insulin by Banting and Best.
I saw that this week too.
Superb. And you know, what's so timely now as we think of the miracle of science that has brought a vaccine for COVID in 10 months when normally it would be 10 years work or so. But you know, Canadians were part of that, 2 Canadian discovery groups. But we go back to that first prize in medicine won by Canadians by Banting and Best. And it one shows the contribution of talent that Canada has scientifically. And secondly, that we should know more about these very special people. So Charles then endowed the Heritage Minutes at Historica, on whose board he served since then. And that continues to produce these remarkable stories, especially aimed at the young, that tell them something about Canada, to help them take pride in Canada and to be inspired by these Canadians going forward. The other one that I'm so fond of that has just come out is the Liberation of Holland in 1944 by the Canadians. And it captures the feeling so well. I've had the privilege of traveling in the north of Holland 2 or 3 times with my Canadian flag or my Canadian passport. We were there once as Governor General. I can tell you that you won't buy your own lunch or a pint of beer in any pub or restaurant in the north of Holland, because they all remember that liberation. And that was, again, a proud moment for Canada in doing something really important for peace in the world.
As a child of the 80s, I feel like the Heritage Minutes are imprinted in my mind. I can, burnt toast as soon as you talked about the Heritage Minutes or Laura Secord, rummaging her way through the woods. But just to bring it back to MISC, I feel like, Mr. Broffman, so much of what you have done has been to educate the public. And what's so interesting about MISC's mandate is that there is a public mandate to the institution as well, that it's not just academics talking to students or academics talking to other academics. What do you feel in the past 25 years MISC has been able to accomplish?
Well, there is a breakthrough that nobody likes to talk about very much. But a sticky point in our negotiations with McGill was that we wanted to participate as a board or as part of a board with the decision-making of this institute. And normally universities had been saying across North America, give us your money and go away, please. And we said, no, we have some brain power, and we would like to have a joint board with McGill. And my dear friend, Ali Patterson, with whom I had gone to grammar school, and we were in grade 1 together, he was now chairman of the board of McGill. And we had pretty good, we had Tom Axworthy, former Secretary of the Cabinet, and John Hobday, who was a great arts and culture man, lead our negotiating team. And eventually it sawed off that we would have a board composed of 1/3 of McGill, 1/3 of my family, or my family appointees, and 1/3 joint. Now, what happened was we asked as a board for McGill to bring in 2 to 3 candidates to be the original head of the institute. Unfortunately, they brought in one, and poor Alex came to my house because my wife thought we should all get together and say hello to each other. And there was one, he could have walked on water. There was no way, because the board was very upset and said, well, this is no way to start anything. From that moment on to this moment, nobody knows who represents whom, who's on my family, who's a joint one, and who's the McGill one. The board meshed brilliantly together. I don't think there's been a board decision that has ever been anything but unanimous. And I think for an institute at a university, that's rather remarkable. So that's one thing that was done. The second thing was that the people who took over the running of it have not only had these major conferences year after year, but they've invited people to speak called Lunch and Learn at McGill. That's mostly aimed towards the college students. I'm sure, Althea, you participated in more than one of them. And I think that's another breakthrough that we've had. And now we look towards the future, I think with a lot of confidence. That the country seems to know what it is and where it's going. And we might not lead that, but we'll certainly participate in it.
Well, Theo, there's another observation I can make to that important glimpse of history that Charles has given, dealing with the issue of directions and appointments with respect to privately funded institutes. And he's captured it well. And it shows the importance of establishing pretty early on and in the deed of gift what the intent is for the institute. And I think we worked at that, and it, I think, was carefully drafted, and that was important. But secondly, the importance of good governance and how reinforced that was by the experience of the Institute. It has now and has had really a spectacular board with a very, very wide breadth of views to embrace the whole of Canada. I think that has served its well. And, you know, early on, there were some tussles about that. The traditional academic interest of the university was to have this as a very scholarly institute. And our history department was really quite strong in the fact that the first director should be a very well-established scholar of Canadian history, without much interest in the notion of making Canadian history more popular, more broadly understood, put more in the vernacular, so to speak. And that was a challenge. And I guess our first candidate, I can speak of now, wonderful late Des Morton, the right man. Des came up on the list of the group of academics looking at candidates. And when his CV hit my desk and Alex's as well, we said, my heavens, this individual looks great. Des was a Canadian military historian and regarded by any of his peers as one of the great leaders in that field. So as a traditional scholar, he was just first class. He was also a very good teacher. So he fit all of the things that the academic profile would want. And then we turned to the more, the broader port of the popularizing thing. And Des wrote a high school text for high school students about Canadian history. That was frowned a bit upon as kind of old potboiler stuff and dumbed down a little bit by very traditional scholars. He also had a custom of writing weekly columns in one of the newspapers. I think it might have been Toronto Star. And he was always engaged in responses on television, so on. Alfie, he'd be the kind of person you would interview. And he had views that he could put so people could understand. That turned out to be a drawback to the traditional community. They said, look, this guy writes newspaper columns. He's a journalist. He's not a scholar. We said he's both. And finally overcome the fact that, yes, he's a fine scholar, so you can't discount him on that. And then he has this other capacity to engage with networks across the country and make Canadian history meaningful. And that satisfies one of the visions. So it came the day that the Des then was coming to make his presentation to the board. And the day before, I went into a little more depth than Des, and I realized that he had been a member of the New Democratic Party for many years, and in fact had drafted one of the most important documents in the Constitution of the Democratic Party. And I thought, oh my heavens, the business people on the board are just going to go apoplectic when they see this candidate. And, you know, writing newspaper columns and so on, engaging in political issues and policy statements for the New Democratic Party. And so in fear and trepidation, we proceeded. And Des was introduced. I think Alex was chairing that meeting. Charles was on his right. And he proceeded to present his vision of what he would do should he be fortunate and be chosen president of the director of the Institute. And about 3 minutes into his presentation, perhaps it was for Charles, Charles interrupted in his courteous way saying, Mr. Chair, Alex, may I interrupt? Professor Morton, may I interrupt and ask a question? I thought, oh no, here it goes. It's right down the drain. And Charles paused and he said, you know, Dr. Morton, he said, I have thought a lot about this institute. I've heard many, many people describe what we want it to do, what it should do, seen many papers on it, etc. In 4 minutes, you've captured what we hope to achieve in that institute better than I've heard from anyone else. As far as I'm concerned, if you accept the job, I'll be delighted. We stopped the meeting then. It was unanimous, and Des was a wonderful director, and that was Charles.
Oh, that's a great story.
I remember David calling you the day before because I'd received this CV on this chap, Des Morton. First place, he was not a McGillian. He was at the University of Toronto. I think he was running one of their colleges. Yes. And in the second place, he was NDP. In the third place, we just gotten rid of our first candidate. Now came this guy who, and also he was an expert on the Army.
Yep.
And followed the Army very closely. And I remember calling you, David, before Alex and I met with him and said, well, what the heck do we do if this guy doesn't pan out? And you said, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, or if we come to it. And Des sat down with Alex and me, and I must say, in 10 minutes, he had us totally blown away. One of the things that you didn't mention, David, which was important to us, is that he had a great sense of humor.
Oh, yes.
Very dry, but very funny. And he could therefore override objections very easily with just a little bit of humor here, a little bit of humor there. I can't think of anyone, frankly, I don't think you can either, who could have been the #1 person to open MISC. And then he was followed by Antonia Maioni, and she was wonderful, just wonderful. I can't think of a better person to follow a Des Morton than Antonio. And now we have Daniel Bellan, and Daniel is superb. He's the Energizer Bunny in spades. I think you know that up there.
Yeah, I do. And in fact, when I started at McGill, at MISC, Desmond Morton was the head of the institute, and then Antonio took over. But one thing that struck me from both, especially I would say Dr. Morton and Professor Benanger, is that their enthusiasm was infectious. Like Dr. Morton would invite us over for supper and would feed us what the troops on the front would have been eating. I think Gail did all the work there, but that he would invite like 100 people to his home to bring history alive is really one of the things I think that helped make MISC special. And I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, you were going to say something. I interrupted.
Well, my bad habit of interrupting you, Althea. Thank you. I just wanted to draw a lesson or two from what Charles has just said. One is the importance of a strong board with wise and broad perspectives. And MISC has been well served by that in the original composition that Charles referred to. And good people, I'm not aware, Charles, of anyone who we asked in the period that I was involved that refused to join the board for not enough time, et cetera. All have done so and did very enthusiastically. The second, the importance of choice of leaders. It makes such a difference. And you've just referred to Des and Antonio and Daniel now. What a difference that makes. And the ability of that leader to A, work with the board, B, work with the university. C, work with the scholarly community beyond the university, and D, work with all of those collaborators that are part of this business of helping Canadians to understand the great strengths of this country, the challenges of this country, and how in a very collaborative, inclusive way we go about solving them. And I think MISC has just played such an important role in being that kind of propagator of who we are, and also such an important instigator of how we go about the interdisciplinary solutions to the challenges that lie ahead.
Mr. Broffman, did you want to add something to that? I see you nodding your head.
No, I just happen to agree with David completely, but I wonder, I guess I'm wondering right now, if the next question you're going to ask is where do we go from here? Is that the question you might have on your mind?
I was going to go there, yes. Where do you think we should go from here?
Well, I can't say more of the same, but this is what I think, is that as these young people go through the MISC experience and the university experience writ large, they're going to have a deeper appreciation of the country when it comes to whatever career they're going to be in, be it law, be it medicine, be it business, be it sports. They're going to say, I'm a Canadian. What's gone on in my country that I can build upon? What is there that marks me as a little bit different than, say, my American competitor friend or my European competitor friend? Who am I? Where am I going? And I think that MISC, and as well as the university, of course, because you couldn't have it isolated, will give that inside knowledge that just sort of sits in your heart and sits in your mind and says, this is who I am. We in Canada have always lived on our export markets. Knowing who we are even deeper, I think, will help us in those export markets. David, I don't know what you think.
I think that's a marvelous statement, Charles, who we are. And I would say helping us not only to understand who we are, but what we want to be, and to broaden our perspective, not to be provincial and local and narrow and inclusive or tribal, but to use the diversity and inclusivity, which is really a hallmark of this country, given our important immigration policy, and see that in terms of our engagement with the world. And I wrote a book called Trust, and one of the reasons that drove us to write that book is a concern about the diminution of trust in public institutions. And that has affected Canada as well as affected many other jurisdictions. But Canada is somewhat unique. I often ask the question, what percentage of the world's population lives in a functioning democracy? 50%, 25%, whatever, 15%. Well, the Economist Intelligence Unit has an answer to that. It's 8.3%. 8.3% of the world's population lives in a fully functioning democracy. And that 8.3% does not include the United States, France, and the United Kingdom. The 5 countries that stand at the top of that list in order are Iceland, Norway, Sweden, New Zealand, and Canada, separated just by about 1%. Sweden's 10 million population, the others much less than that. Canada's 38 million, one of the only sort of middle-sized country there. And that is something of which we should be very proud in Canada, but also not to be complacent about that and other features of our country. And so we work constantly at building trust in our institutions and trust in our fully functioning democracy. And I think MISC is an important instrument to do just that in the way Charles has described. And I would say it's helping the next generation of Canadians to see ourselves as proud Canadians, but also global citizens. The problems we face are very much mutually dependent on a world scale, beginning with the pandemic and the others we can rhyme off. And I think that ability to think beyond me to the we, beyond our narrow particular provincial location and orientation to the countrywide orientation, and then to the worldwide orientation is very important. And as we look at what will happen over the next 2 or 3 decades with climate change and with the kind of conflict we have dealing with the digital revolution, et cetera, the pandemic we've just been through, I think that Canada notion of being a constructive and positive player on the world scene with the breadth of views will be very, very key. And MISC has a big role in that.
You might not be old enough to recall the glory days of Canada's international standing after World War II, when we had the number 2, I believe, Navy in the world. And then when Lester B. Pearson was Prime Minister, we had a very important role in the world bodies. And one of the things I regret is that I don't think we've ever taken our proper place as a leader, and maybe the leader, of the Middle Nations. You have the United States, China, Russia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, UK maybe. But in those countries you mentioned, such as Sweden, Norway, et cetera, Iceland, we have a role to play, and I don't think we've played it as well as we could. And I hope that a MISC and a McGill and the University of Toronto, the other universities in Canada, can start pointing us towards our rightful role, in my opinion, as leader of the middle powers.
I think these are wonderful concluding remarks. I think you've given us lots to chew on, actually, in the next 2 days. Thank you very much, David Johnson, Charles Broffman, for your insight and all you have done and continue to do for MISC. On behalf of MISC, we hope that you enjoy watching the rest of the conference. I thank you very much. And to everybody, have a great day. All the best.
Thanks, Althea, and have a wonderful couple of days in your conference. Great to be with you, old friend, Charles. Thank you.
And to be on the same platform as David Johnson is an honor and a pleasure and a treasure. God bless you, David.
God bless, Charles. Thank you.
Thank you both.